one group of people that I have a tremendous amount of respect for are people who study biology, particularly anatomy. I don't know, we could call them anatomists. We'll call them anatomists. But I have a tremendous amount of respect for people who study anatomy. For those who are watching and might not be familiar with anatomists, these are particularly in biology, people who study human anatomy. They're the ones that give, names to all of the body parts. Um, and, it's levels to, being in, to labeling things on the body, right? I mean, it's easy for you or myself, we can point out, you know, hands, nose, fingers, and toes. You know, that's, that's pretty easy to do, relatively easy to do. But it gets a lot more complex when you start talking about liver, spleen, left ventricle, all these types of things. And obviously, I'm not a biologist, but it's important for somebody to be, breaking these things down. What I want to emphasize in this video is the anatomy of equations. The same way that the human body has different parts that people know and is broken down into different, names and whatnot and parts, equations are the same way. I want to, before I get into this example, I want to let you know some good news, which is that you already know these parts just looking at them. Once I write this example, and let me just go ahead and do that. There we go. 4 times 3 equals 12. Now, just looking, at this equation, you know exactly what's being said, for the most part. But each character or symbol that you see has a name associated with it. And that's what we're going to talk about, because actually, believe it or not, knowing the names of these, knowing the anatomy of equations, even easy equations like this one, knowing the anatomy of equations, simple equations, really does help for when equations start to look more complex. But for this example right here, 4 times 3 equals 12. There are 3 major parts of every equation that you're going to want to know. And again, the same with the body parts. You definitely want to know about hands and feet, nose and toes, eyes and ears. These are things that you're just going to want to know. And the same thing if you're going to talk about the human body, at least, you know what I'm saying? And the same thing goes for equations. So I'm going to really briefly write down these parts that you're going to want to be familiar with. And these are inside of every equation. The first is terms. Every equation has terms. And we'll get into that briefly. The second thing is every equation has operations. More specifically, we'll just say operations. And thirdly, all equations have symbols that you're going to want to be familiar with. These are the 3 parts of every equation. Now, the equations can get more complex. They can have more things than these 3. but you're gonna want to be familiar with these three things, with terms. You're gonna want to be comfortable with terms, operations, and symbols, and identifying them. So let's scroll back up to 4 times 3 equals 12. And I'm gonna just lasso this thing. Can I lasso? Yeah. We're gonna move it down. So we got 4 times 3 equals 12. So let's just, with this example, label all of the parts of this equation. Let's break down the anatomy of this equation. So first, let's identify the terms. Terms are going to be the numbers 4 and 3 and the number 12. That's it. That's all that these are all of the terms in this particular equation. Now, next we have operations. We could ask the question, well, why isn't this a term? Or why isn't this a term? That's not a bad question. But I'm gonna explain that right now. It's because they're already something else. So we identified the terms. The second thing that we want to identify is the operation in the equation, or the operations. There's only one operation in this particular equation, and that's this multiplication operation. Operations are going to be addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And later on in the anatomy series, we'll talk about the different ways to write multiplication. Because we could write this in a different way. We don't have to write that X symbol. But we'll deal with that in a later video. So we now have our terms identified, which are 4, 3, and 12. We have our operations identified, or operation identified, which is this multiplication right here. That's the operation that we are to perform. And lastly, we got this thing right here. Now, this is neither a term, and it's also not an operation. It's not telling us to do something. Excuse me. So this would qualify this equal sign. This is going to be one of our symbols. Excuse me. The equal sign is going to be one of our, or the only symbol, particularly in this equation. Now, one could argue and say, well, 4 and 3 and 12 and the multiplication symbol, these are all symbols as well. That is true, but that's not what we're doing. That's not what we're doing in this video. The equal sign is more of a symbol in the truest sense, and more in just its rawest form. Qualifies better as a symbol. And so now, excuse me, now that we have identified the anatomy of this particular equation, we are slightly more equipped to break down more complex equations. And so let's do that now.